Hi, this is Marita, Conlon-McKenna, author of Under the Hawthorn Tree. Under the Hawthorn Tree is set in Ireland during the Great Famine. It's about 3 children who, at the worst height of the famine, disaster strikes their family and somehow they have to survive. The book was published in 1990 and it has astounded me by, first of all, the reaction to the book and how many people have read it and how many children love it, and it has a life in its own. I never expected, first of all, it to be published, or to have the journey it has made, that has been published in so many countries and in so many languages and is on the curriculum, not just in Ireland, but in parts of England, in the US, in Mexico, and used all around the world and translated into almost every language. So it's a very special book and it's a very simple story about how people survive the worst of things. And in Eileen, Michael and Peggy and their family, and the journey they make at the height of the famine in Ireland through everything that's happening and everything they witness, it's an incredible story. And it still astounds me, and I'm still so delighted to have written it for my daughter and that it has gone for me and gone out, and schools and kids and teachers and young readers, old and young, have made their own of the book. And that's what should happen with a book. It should have its own life.
So here at Strokestown Park in the National Famine Museum, I've been working closely with what the museum does here with National Famine Way, which is a commemorative walk that particularly focuses on that journey that the 1,490 made when they were forcibly evicted off the lands of County Roscommon in Lissanuffy and made to walk from Strokestown all the way to Dublin. So the walk itself is a trail of 165 kilometres, and it connects the National Famine Museum here and EPIC, which is the National Immigration Museum in Dublin. So part of this walk, when we led students, was to connect the students to the bronze shoes. There's over 33 pairs of bronze shoes that are all along the canal from here to Dublin, and part of what we did was to focus in on what these bronze shoes mean, the symbolism of them, what stories lie behind them, and to introduce students to the Irish story of mass immigration, what was happening during the Great Hunger, and how the history that is close to them is still relevant today.
So my name is Dr. Pauline Gardner and I'm the Education Officer here at the Ulster American Folk Park, which is just outside Omagh in County Tyrone. Here we offer a range of educational programmes for schools, and by far our most popular one is our famine programme. So it is tied very tightly to the curriculum and it's directed towards kids who are around the age 10 or 11. It very much supports their classroom-based learning. I'd say the vast majority of classes that we have here would come to do a famine programme, and we offer the programme from September right through to the end of May.
I wrote Under the Hawthorn Tree for my daughter, and I wanted to grab her by the throat and force her into thinking about the famine and reading about the famine. I wanted a story that she would be thrown in the deep end and really worry and care about these 3 children, Eileen, Michael and Peggy, and their little sister Bridget. So the beginning of the book is really, really dark because they're living in this famine cottage. They've nothing to eat, and everything that could go wrong is going wrong. Their dad has gone off on the roadworks to try and earn some money to pay for food for them, and the mum is at home with them, and their little sister gets sick. And within the very start of the book, something terribly tragic happens in the family. And from then, the mother goes to get help and the children are left on their own. And of course what happens is the landlord's agent comes and children cannot stay on their own in a cottage with nobody around. They wouldn't be let. As it is, we're putting adults out of cottages and evicting them. So basically they're told that a whole group from their area are being marched to the workhouse, and they're to pack up their things and get ready to go. And Eilidh, Michael and Peggy, they don't want to go to the workhouse because during the famine people realised that during going to the workhouse, brothers and sisters and babies and children, mothers and fathers would all be separated, and they wanted to be together. And so the book follows their journey through famine-ravaged Ireland and the journey they make across the countryside. And they see soup kitchens, they see people dying, they see death, they see horrific things. They get sick, they get hurt, they get shocked, they get upset because they're on their own. And at one stage in the book, they actually don't think they'll survive it. That's too much, and they're too tired, and they're too weak, and they're too hungry. But when you're writing a children's book, you can't have a bad ending.
So whenever we first meet our schools, the thing that we often do is find out where they are in their journey and learning about the famine. And because of the way the curriculum is here in the north of Ireland, teachers have a lot of flexibility in how and when they teach the subject. And we find that a lot of schools will be leaning into it by using Under the Hawthorn Tree by Marita, Conlon-McKenna. And they're familiar with this type of building from Marita's books. So they already have that idea in their own imagination of what it would be like for the family to be living in a cottage like this. So whenever they come in here, it's very much putting that kind of, the imagination that they create from Marita's writings into a real life space. So they can imagine the children in the cottage, they can imagine the father has left and the mother's sitting struggling here on their own. So it really helps them engage with the narrative in Marita's books as well. So whenever the children come in, the first thing we ask them is it what you expected? And they're usually quite surprised by how warm and dry it is in here. So that gives us an opportunity to talk about the construction of the building. Again, so we talk about how it's made from stone, but how people would have made their homes from turf. And we have a turf basket that we would show them, or even sods from the ground. So the different levels in society of how people lived. We talk about where people would have slept. So who would have slept in the bed, the adults, where would the children have slept? On the floor. We talk about the different types of furniture that they have in here, from our little creepy stools, and particularly we point attention to the potato skib that we have here in the floor. So we would normally bring out a smaller one so that the children can handle it and see how it's made. And they usually make the connection right away. It's quite similar to a sieve. And we talk about how this is how the people would have cooked their potatoes, boiled them over the fire and poured them into the skib, and the family would have sat around communally and ate the potatoes just with their hands. We have lovely little wooden noggins that were made specifically for us so that the kids can handle the noggins as well. So we're kind of saying this is the home, this is the way the people lived. We kind of compare it to a large family maybe living in one single bedroom of their modern day houses to kind of put it into a wee bit of context for them. We normally have a visitor guide in here as well. So once we kind of point out the features of the home, the hearth, the cauldron, the skib, the bed, the children will be given an opportunity then to ask any questions of ourselves as education people, or with our visitor guide, who will be in here in costume as well. And they're usually very good because a lot of times they'll go into first person interpretation with the children and talk about it as if they're actually living in the cottage here themselves. So from our cabin we come across into our lazy beds, where the children will see where the family would have grown the potatoes that would have fed them. So here we're looking for a lot of information from them. So we want them to think about why the potato was such a good source of food for these very, very poor people. And they'll usually come up with great answers, that they're really sustainable, that they're cheap and easy to grow, that they're really good for you. And these are all the answers that we're looking for from the children. But then we kind of start to ask them to think about the problems that's associated with relying on a monoculture. So what happens if you lose that food source? And again, we go back to our archive material and we talk to them about a man called William Trench, who was a land agent in County Cork. And William talks about a terrible stench that he comes across as he's travelling around Ireland. And it also ties in nicely with Under the Hawthorn Tree, because Marita also talks about the smell that emanated from these rotten potatoes.
But when you're going around the Ulster American Folk Park, they obviously have cabins and cottages which are of their time. They have the farm and the potato drills, they have the old schoolyard, and then you go down this old kind of street of the time with little shops, and you go down to Gaeltacht where the ship's office is and you get a ticket to go onto the ship. That was nothing to do with the book, but what's happened is the children going there have made it that the schoolhouse was the schoolhouse where they were, that the cottage was Ivy, Michael and Peggy's cottage, and that where the drills were, that's where the potatoes failed. The ship is where Peggy went, the ship's office is where Peggy got her ticket to go to Boston. And that's a great thing with kids' imagination, how they take what is there and use it to become part of the book. It's amazing how it was never set up that way, but the link with the book now has become stronger and stronger over time.
The majority of the students partaking in the workshops were between the ages of 9 and 11. So most of them had read in class or by themselves Under the Hawthorn Tree by Marita Conlon-McKenna. And when I brought in the shoe stories with National Famine Way, they had already connected immediately. Once I said that Under the Hawthorn Tree, I could see a light go on in their eyes, and it made it easier then to delve into the story of Daniel Tai. We tapped into one of the shoe stories that, in particular, that Marita Conlon-McKenna had written around Daniel Tai. So a 12-year-old boy, practically the same age as them, in the same area as them in some of the schools. So they could even visualize where he was and where his house was. With a mother, a father, like they themselves, brothers and sisters like some of them. And we reenacted his story, which was about a young boy who lost his father after he had been effectively worked to death, and they were left in a state of impoverishment.
Well, when it came to write about the 1,490 people who were evicted and were sent on this journey from Strokestown to walk along the Royal Canal with the bailiff to Dublin, that is too big a group and too many people. And how could you tell that? It's a huge number of people. And it's like, when I was writing Under the Hawthorn Tree about the famine, to focus it down and focus it down and focus it down. And obviously Daniel Tai, who was 12 years old, who went with his mother and his uncle William and his brothers and his sister on this journey, following town after town, having no proper shoes, getting shoes probably didn't fit him, they were hurting his feet, and the things he witnessed. And Daniel would have grown up in Lisanoffy, where he lived with his family. His father had died during the famine after the roadworks, got sick and fell ill and died. And they were evicted from their cottage by the agent of Dennis Mahan, the landlord. But following Daniel Tai on that journey, he didn't know what was going on outside his area because children wouldn't have known that and people wouldn't have known that then. So he saw barges of food along the canal, laden down with food that were going to be shipped to towns and shipped to England. He saw the start of the railway. The railway was being built that would go across Ireland. He saw mass burials. He saw people with slides carrying bodies. He witnessed things, a bit like Under the Hawthorn Tree, he witnessed things going along the way. And some people were wary when they saw this crowd of, I suppose, ragtag crowd coming and didn't want them near their town because there was illness, and then they were trying to get food. They went to soup kitchens, were fed in the local soup kitchens, and people might have been wary of them. One or two places they were welcomed, and they saw the crowds queuing to get into workhouses and the state the people were in. So it was a very harrowing journey for him, but yet he was young and he would have been excited to see a new place and go new things, and excited at the thought of going on a ship because he had never been on a ship. And he had certainly never been to Dublin, and he certainly had never been to Liverpool, and he had no idea of what was going to lie ahead for him and his family and what they would experience. But he had an optimism which young people have, that even though the circumstances were terrible, I think everybody who went on that ship had hope, but unfortunately the hope was dashed for a lot of people on the journey.
In the Past the Shoes 24 workshops, we broke down the time in a way that we could cover a variety of subjects. So often we would show the students the National Famine Way's map, which encompasses all of where the bronze shoes are, so there's like little stops, and so the students could see where their school is in relation to the canal. We would introduce the idea of the canal to the students and ask them a question: who's been on the canal, who has seen the bronze shoes? The co-facilitator I worked with would usually focus on a little bit of the history of the canal and understand that during the time of the Great Hunger, there were so many boats going out on that canal full of food. We would talk about that briefly. And then we'd get the students on their feet. They'd take time to learn how to breathe, how to stand, how to use their voice. And we'd create freeze frames around the themes relating to hunger, poverty, rich versus poor, and monarchy. And also we would create freeze frames around aristocratic lifestyle compared to courtier life, cottage life. And then once we have read the script, I would cast students that felt confident and comfortable with standing up and bringing to life a character in the role of Daniel Tai, his mother, his father, the sisters, the brothers. We would cast someone to be the landlord, someone to be the person that evicts everybody. Students that didn't feel comfortable talking, they might concentrate on a walk or a dance that focuses entirely on what it was like to go on that walk. And I'd say we'd do this in 3 stages. The walk, you begin fairly strong, but you're in a state of already malnourishment. But then in the middle part, you're getting too exhausted until finally, when you're at the end, a lot of them are falling on their feet. So within the sequence of a 3-minute music piece, they had reenacted the idea of what that walk actually means before they themselves do a part of the walk where they pass the shoes. And we would then draw on a commemorative stone a hawthorn flower, which most of them understood the significance of because they'd read under the hawthorn tree, and it then gave students the chance to express what they would like to leave as an offering or a way to remember those people that died.
Well, going to museums and that is fantastic because it brings history to life, and especially when it's a real place like Strokestown. And I think for students and kids from school, it's a fantastic place to visit because first of all you have the big famine exhibition which you can go through. Then you have the house, and you can walk into this big house. It has a massive nursery full of toys and games and things that the family used to play with. It has the library, it has the fantastic dining room and the living room, and of course this incredible kitchen and the place where the stables were and the gardens and grounds. It's just history coming alive, and I think there's nothing better. My books, I want them to bring history alive, but when I walk into places like Strokestown, it brings history alive, and it's a fantastic learning experience for students and kids to go in and imagine themselves living there, imagine being part of it, and the exhibition telling them the story, this really big story of the famine and the things that happened, and all the people, be they tenants, people like Daniel, be like Dennis Mahan, the owner, the family, what happened in this house and what the story of this big house was.
So here we are in our lovely ship gallery with our fantastic full-size replica of the Brig Union. So the children leave the school and they come down the streets and arrive here in the dockside, and we congratulate them on being able to survive such an arduous journey all the way from the little tiny cabin in the Sperrin Mountains to here, the dockside, where they're getting ready to board the ship. So whenever the kids come on board the ship, they are asked to sit along the benches here at the tables or beside the berths. And we have a bit of discussion about what they can see and what they might expect if they were travelling on a ship like this. So we point out the berths and how many people may have slept there. We point out the buckets that they would have used for the toilets. We have barrels that they would have carried water in, and we also have ship's biscuit or hardtack that the children can explore as well, and as a sensory element. So this is usually a highlight of their famine visit to us, and they're very excited about coming on board the ship. But we round up our workshop here with them, and it's really important for us that the kids take away a sense of empathy with the past and with people who are experiencing these type of things today. So we will ask them, why is it important that we are learning about this? And they'll usually come up with things like, because it's our history, it's important that we know about our past. But lots of children are exposed to all the difficulties that are happening in the world today, and they can make those connections between Irish people leaving Ireland because of the famine in the past and people having to leave other countries today and perhaps coming here. So we ask them, do they have family members who maybe have migrated, or if there's people within their school community or their wider community they've had to come here from other places, and they can understand the difficult decisions that people had to make in order to make those very difficult journeys. So that's what we leave them with. We leave them with that sense of, yes, this is the past, but it's very, very connected to our present.
The story of Daniel Tai is about a boy that was the same age as them. And most of the children in the schools now across Ireland have other students in the class that are also immigrants themselves. You know, most of the classrooms I went to, when I asked them, what is immigration? What happens when we talked about immigration, we talked about emigration, for what reasons would people need to leave their country? And most students could relate to that very quickly because they had a friend in the class that also had to leave with nothing and begin a life somewhere else. So I think bringing a story that is over 175 years old and bringing it into a classroom today, it's important to make it relevant to them and to bring it to life. Like, what are the themes behind it? Why did that happen? And they certainly responded very eagerly to the theatrical part and the element. And interestingly, when we went on the walk, I think that they understood it in a much deeper way. So students afterwards, I was talking to them, I spent a few minutes as we'd finished the walk, they were quite moved by it.